Let's talk about enzymes. What would be the number one symptom that you would get if you were deficient in digestive enzymes? You're really dealing with about 5 different pieces of this puzzle that you have to understand. You have the stomach, you have the pancreas, you have the gallbladder. Even though the gallbladder does not produce enzymes, it's involved in enzymes. Then you have the small intestine and you have the large intestine. So let's start with the stomach. What enzymes does the stomach produce? Well, primarily one called pepsin, and pepsin has everything to do with digesting protein. But the stomach also makes another enzyme called lipase, which can help you break down fats, but only like a backup if you don't make it from other organs. We'll talk about that. But pepsin is a very powerful protein enzyme that helps you break down protein. And pepsin is activated by hydrochloric acid in the stomach. And one of the big problems with you not having enough of this enzyme is really not having enough hydrochloric acid. But maybe you have acid in your stomach, but just the pH is not acid enough. And if you don't have the acid, you're not going to have the release of the enzyme. And you're going to experience various symptoms. The number one symptom you're going to experience is indigestion. And then you're going to get gas. Those are the two primary ones. But if you're not digesting protein, okay, because you don't have enough acid, you're going to have all sorts of things that are going to occur lower in the digestive tract. For example, that acid is also necessary to activate the gallbladder to release bile. And if you don't have that activation, then we don't have enough bile, and then we don't get the necessary detergent to help extract the fat soluble nutrients from the fat that you eat. And then we have undigested protein material that ends up in the small intestine. And now both the pancreas and the small intestine have to overcompensate, and they have to produce more enzymes to help break down this material. And many times this doesn't happen, so you end up with all sorts of issues with gas and bloating and constipation, all stemming from this lack of acid that's supposed to activate and release the enzyme. So typically in this situation, a lot of people take pepsin, but they don't take the hydrochloric acid that's necessary to activate it. So it doesn't really work that well. Why are we not producing hydrochloric acid? It could be you're just getting older, because as we age, we don't produce enough hydrochloric acid. It could be because you're taking antacids. That's one big reason why you don't have enough acid, because maybe you have heartburn, which, by the way, comes from a lack of stomach acid in the first place, and that valve is not closing. So if the valve doesn't close, you get regurgitation, you get GERD, and you can have a lot of problems, as in acid reflux, which could also be caused from a lack of vitamin B1, as well as a lack of vitamin D. So the first thing that I would do if I had indigestion and gas is I would take betaine hydrochloride. Betaine hydrochloride is a really good, simple solution for activating this enzyme in the stomach to help you with protein digestion. All right, let's shift gears to the pancreas, okay? So if you don't have the full function of the pancreas, you could have what's called pancreatic enzyme insufficiency, okay? So you just don't make enough enzymes. And the majority of enzymes for digestion actually come from that pancreas. So this is very, very important. The pancreas works like crazy to produce enough enzymes to help you digest food. So based on what you're chewing, there's little signals get sent down to tell the pancreas to get ready to digest, whether it's fats, proteins, carbohydrates, or other things. And so the pancreas has to produce that in preparation for the food that's coming through. And then depending on how much acid you have in your stomach is whether you're going to release enough bile to help work to break down the fats small enough so the enzymes, the lipase enzymes, the fat enzymes can act on this fat. You see, if you don't have enough bile to do the big work, then that lipase enzyme really is going to have a hard time breaking down that fat. And then you end up with undigested fat that goes through the small intestine and into the large bowel. And then that symptom, which can come from a pancreas problem, is called steatorrhea, okay, which is undigested fat. So you have this large volume of stool, very bad odor. Sometimes it's floating. Sometimes it leaves skid marks. The color could be anywhere from light brown to pale to gray. And that can be coming from a lack of pancreatic enzymes or even a lack of bile. Maybe you don't have a gallbladder. Maybe you have a bile deficiency. Maybe you're just not producing enough bile. But if you're deficient in the enzymes coming out of the pancreas, you're going to have problems with the digestion of fat. You're going to have bloating. You're going to have abdominal pain. And you're going to have a lack of fat-soluble vitamins like vitamin A, vitamin K, vitamin E, vitamin D. And you can have a lot of different symptoms from that. I almost forgot to mention, if there's a problem in the stomach and you don't have enough hydrochloric acid, you can be deficient in amino acids, okay? And that could be a big issue with building your muscle, and you may just start losing weight and you might feel weak. Now, with the pancreas, one common cause of this enzyme deficiency is pancreatitis. So what could cause that? Well, there's some rare things like tumors, certain diseases like cystic fibrosis, which is a problem with certain fluids like digestive fluids or juices, like your mucus in your lung. But more commonly, okay, what can happen is you have either gallstones or gallbladder sludge, okay? And this sludge is stuck in the pipes, in the bile ducts. The bile duct, as it comes out through the liver, kind of branches over into the pancreas and the gallbladder. So if you have a stone or sludge in these ducts, it can back up not just the gallbladder, but the pancreas as well. And it can create all sorts of inflammation. And it's a much more common problem than other problems. And the solution is something called TUDCA, which is a type of bile salt that can just open up those ducts because it allows the sludge to open up and become thinned, okay? And you can actually even help to reduce gallstones with that. And the very reason why you have sludge in the first place is maybe you're on a low-fat diet. Maybe you don't have enough saturated fat in your diet that actually activates this whole thing. Maybe you're eating too many carbs, increasing your insulin. Maybe it's from too much stress, or you're on steroids for some reasons, or you are on birth control pills because too much estrogen can create that problem. Now, another common problem with the pancreas is that, let's say you have diabetes and you have chronic diabetes, and so you have a big problem with the beta cell of the pancreas. Well, the pancreas both produces hormones like insulin and another hormone called glucagon, but it also, half of it is all about enzymes. So being a diabetic can put a big strain on the digestive part of that pancreas. So one of the best things to do if you know you have a pancreatic problem is to take pancreatic enzymes. Pancreatin is a group of pancreatic enzymes you can take in a supplement, and that can take a huge strain off your digestion and help you. And if you were to take that, I would also recommend you take betaine hydrochloride to have the complete package, and it probably wouldn't hurt to also take with that some ox bile. So let's now shift gears to the gallbladder. The gallbladder is also going to help you extract fat-soluble nutrients because the bile that's made by the liver and stored in the gallbladder concentrates. So every time you eat, it's squeezed out and it's going to go into the small intestine and help as a part of this digestive synergy between the stuff that's coming out of the stomach into the small intestine and then the help from the pancreas. And the pancreas is like the icing on the cake. It helps to fully break down that fat so you have the complete digestion of fat. And even though the gallbladder doesn't produce enzymes, it really contributes to these other enzymes. And it's a really common problem, and a lot of people have a problem with it. A lot of people don't have enough bile. Some common symptoms of that would be bloating, belching, and burping. Not to mention a lack of fat-soluble nutrients, vitamin A, D, E, and K. But also you can notice pain in your right shoulder, right through in here that goes up into the neck, or that wraps around into like in the rhomboid area, and a fullness underneath your right rib cage. Now, let's move right down to the small intestine, okay? 90% of all your digestion occurs in the small intestine. Your small intestine actually make enzymes as well. Normally, you're not supposed to have a lot of bacteria in your small intestine compared to the large intestine. So primarily we want the help from the enzymes. And so depending on what's happening at the stomach level and the pancreatic level and the gallbladder is going to determine how hard that small intestine has to compensate or work or release these enzymes. So all these organs are working in synergy together. Now, let's just, for example, say that you don't have enough strong stomach acid, okay? And that's one of your problems. Well, a lot of bacteria in the food can get through because now it can't be killed, because that's one of the key functions of that acid, to prevent microbes from going through. But now we get these microbes that go through there and they end up in the small intestine where they shouldn't be there. And also, because we don't get the signaling from the gallbladder to release bile salts, so it's both the acid and the bile salts to act strongly on that small intestine to ensure that there's not a lot of bacteria that grow in that small intestine tube. And so now we have an increase of bacteria in the small intestine that can then reproduce and grow and develop into what's called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. I mean, one function of bile salts is to act as a detergent to kill off these microbes in your small intestine. And then when it gets all the way down to the last part of the small intestine, it gets reabsorbed and it starts over again. So it's a really important action to prevent SIBO. The same thing with the hydrochloric acid. So now we end up with the SIBO. What is the problem with SIBO? Small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Wow, you have bloating, you have belching, you have abdominal pain, And now you also have competition from these microbes that are hungry, and they're going to eat a lot of your nutrition from your food. So you're going to end up with all sorts of nutritional deficiencies, malnutrition, digestive issues, and the fiber that you eat is going to be fermented at the wrong place in the small intestine instead of the large intestine. So now we get worsening problems when you have your salads, and you get worsening problems with gas going down the other end. And we get worsening problems if you take a probiotic because you're adding more bacteria. So it becomes a big issue. How can we solve that? Well, there are certain tests that you can do to identify if that's your problem. But the solution is to start taking betaine hydrochloride to fix the stomach. The solution is to start taking some ox bile to help with the gallbladder. Cut down the amount of fiber that you consume. In fact, I would do carnivore for a while and also do routine intermittent fasting. And you can also do other things, like you could take a natural antibiotic like garlic, for example. That would be something that can help kill off these microbes. It's not going to be as important as those two other actions. Now, what about the large intestine? Does your large intestine produce enzymes? And the answer is no, but the microbes, the flora, the microbiome do produce a lot of different enzymes to help you with digesting a lot of things, especially things that you can't digest, like fiber. So they're working hard to digest this. And they also digest certain leftover sugars and even leftover proteins. If you don't have enough of the right microbes, the diversity, this is where you get diarrhea, constipation, and of course, fatty stool. That's something that floats that has a very bad odor. And so the best solution would be to fortify the microbiome. If you don't have SIBO, you can feed a wide variety of different plant leaves or plants to help increase the diversity. You can also take a probiotic, which I would highly recommend, or consume fermented foods that have probiotics, of course, only if you don't have SIBO. I hope that answers some of the questions on your digestive tract. But this leads me to the next thing. What is the most underlying important thing you can do to prevent all of these issues? And for that answer, I put this video up on just implementing the right diet right here. Check it out.